Resident Evil 4 is one of the most influential video games ever made. It was instrumental in popularizing design features like over-the-shoulder camera controls and third-person aiming, and nowadays it has a borderline untouchable legacy as an experience that's truly one of a kind. Between gripping action survival horror gameplay with a huge focus on resource management, an ethereal, desaturated aesthetic, and a whole bunch of iconic campiness, it's an undisputed classic that any company with their wits about them wouldn't dare touch for fear of tarnishing the image of what many consider to be their greatest legacy. But given the position that they were in, with two incredibly successful remakes already under their belt, it was only a matter of time until Capcom's development team would have no choice but to set aside their apprehensions and take a stab at it. And by some miracle, I'm just kidding, it was an innumerable amount of hard work, lightning defied convention and struck this series twice. Resident Evil 4 Remake is in every which way everything that I'd hoped it would be. Having played and adored the original a couple of years prior to its release, I knew full well how much gravity the reveal of the remake commanded, and I was hopeful that they would do at least some of that classic experience justice with their reimagining of that world. It's important to understand that trying to conceptualize how RE4 Remake would function prior to its playable demo wasn't particularly easy, even for a big fan. Those features that the original game pioneered had made vast technological strides in the space of 18 years, and the issue is that those unique but outdated third-person controls were the foundation upon which the entire game relied. Both Leon's tools and the enemies he faced were designed for a slower, tankier playstyle. Dynamic enemy speed, lengthy hit stun, the signature headshot into roundhouse combo which launched foes backwards in a ginormous radius. It was all to cover for Leon having to root in place and slowly pick his shots if he wanted to do any damage. Having it any other way just wouldn't have been fair on the player, and as an integral aspect of the combat loop intrinsically linked to the game's limitations, replicating that charm with a modernized approach was something I was very curious to see the new game's take on. And as soon as I got my hands on it, it quickly became clear that nothing of the former's gameplay was being held back. If anything, it had been supercharged. Viciously aggressive enemies complement a far nimbler Leon, capable of every bell and whistle you'd ask of a third-person protagonist, giving the opposition every excuse to overwhelm, launch projectiles, and rush you down until you hit the dirt. To make things even direr, headshots, kicks, and your knife, which all used to be surefire ways to secure a cheap kill, full of safety while being light on resources, are also heavily nerfed, often giving the enemies a pseudo RE2 remake quality to them as they advance on you seemingly unbothered, while tanking multiple headshots to achieve a stun. I'm personally a pretty big fan of these more robust enemies. It makes them feel more dangerous, there's rarely an easy way out, and you'll often find yourself using way more resources than you intended to close out a fight, which helps establish that finely tuned push and pull on your inventory that RE4's item drop system is so famous for mastering. Speaking of resources, that ever-useful knife that could previously be swung relentlessly for high hit stun with no penalty has become a key part of that limited repertoire, and its implementation as a successive feature to the other two Resident Evil remakes is almost flawless. Leon obviously doesn't need it for close-range crowd control anymore, but the increased pace of combat still demands that he have at least some sort of fallback just in case to keep things fair. And the knives do just that. leveling the playing field every now and then without being so spammable that they become overpowered. And their brittle nature makes effective use of them feel all the more impactful. Aside from the combat sandbox receiving some fundamental overhauls to facilitate modern gameplay standards, the rest of the mechanical experience is actually strikingly similar to the original, and I mean that in the best way possible. Most of the changes are just quality of life features or addendums to the way something works to make it more fun. Like gemstones being universally compatible with most of every treasure, or Ashley being able to move around more freely without Leon having to catch her from a fall every 5 seconds. Don't get me wrong, you'll still be shooting valuables down from every conceivable ceiling you could think of, and desperately trying to aim around Ashley during a hectic encounter, but it's the little things with a big impact on long-term enjoyment that have received the most care. And it makes the game insanely replayable as a result. More so than any other RE title I've tried, to the point where I even felt compelled to complete the S+ professional speedrun. A large time commitment, sure, but one where both the gameplay and active decision making never stopped being a source of enjoyment. Thematically, it's hard to ignore that there's a huge shift between the games, but I think it's for the better. In the original, let's be honest here, Leon is ridiculous. Rattling off one-liners like a machine gun, reacting with comedic levels of excess to almost everything that happens, he existed to make the player feel cool for being in his shoes, and nothing more. But writing in the Resident Evil series has come a long way since then, and some attempt to ground not only Leon, but the sheer breadth of outlandish bullshit that happens in the game, especially in the castle, was bound to happen. I just wasn't expecting them to pull it off so well. Each of the interweaving dominant narratives have been subtly rewritten to be much more compelling and conveyed with a genuine emotional weight, which lends far more credibility to the believability of the characters. Leon and Ashley's developing dynamic and unbreakable circumstantial bond feel real. Luis's integral role in the plot is given the prevalence it deserves with more screen time to boot. And even the characters that you might have thought were beyond saving, especially Ramon Salazar, have been toned down with just enough finesse and new supporting context to retain their charm while trying something slightly different. Don't get me wrong though, it's still a little silly. The new, edgy, brooding Leon still finds the time to recount some of his most iconic lines when he feels like it, and the remake generally remains highly referential to its roots throughout. It even drops the act entirely sometimes and goes a step further, with Krauser especially being borderline identical to his prior iteration, and the cinematic action is still as utterly outrageous as ever, with most of the prominent omissions being related to things like how Leon used to be able to run insanely fast for absolutely no reason whenever something started chasing him, and stuff that was so random the team couldn't possibly find a way to justify its inclusion. Okay, this video has, naturally, been really comparative so far, but since we're focusing primarily on the Resident Evil 4 remake, I think it's worth giving it a little time alone in the spotlight to cover exactly what makes it such a fun and engaging experience, regardless of its predecessor's influence. And since we've already covered quite a few of the game's features in detail already, I'm basically going to take this opportunity to quickly rattle off a bunch of stuff that I really liked about the remake. Let's take it from the top. The combat. It's fast-paced, it's punchy, and it's always clawing at your resources, breaking you down and constantly building tension from all angles. The structure. The chapter system may be considered a little dated nowadays, but the way it interacts with the merchant and available areas always makes reaching the next one, and even backtracking, feel fun and mysterious. side missions. Following on from that structure, an abundance of well-integrated side activities which never stray you too far from the task at hand are a simple but effective distraction from the main story, which offer excellent, exclusive incentives for their completion. Treasures. Sure, they may just boil down to hunting objective markers, provided you have the map, but when that open world style of gameplay is only like 5% of the experience, and not the entire thing, exploring and searching through obscure areas to shoot down a suspicious ornament or crack open a chest is actually really fun. The atmosphere. The use of a more realised, harsher take on weather as the night slowly encroaches, and the almost liminal quality to many of the indoor areas is not only aesthetically well implemented, but often used to tip the scales further in the favour of fear when the time is right, which goes a long way in cementing the game's status as a horror in the first place. Characters. We touched on this a little already, but it's night and day. Leon, Ashley, and Luis share a mutually tactful dynamic with writing much improved. Ada is more believable as an unfeeling super spy with a colder demeanour, and while the villains all still have crazy motivations, they're presented and contextualised more clearly to help you understand what those motivations are and why they might have come to be. Lastly, I like to think that everything I've mentioned here comes together in a neat little package called flow. Between the satisfying combat, gripping structure with plenty to do while remaining focused, a viscous horror atmosphere that knows when to turn the dials, and a dynamic, constantly unfolding story to lead you along, you have an experience which genuinely never lets up, regardless of the context. Combative or narrative, serious or a little silly, that flow is never broken, and it's a game you never want to put down. In other words, it's exactly like its predecessor, only updated in all the best ways. And I feel like we've learned a little here about how the developmental approach towards this remake came to be. No one thing makes the original Resident Evil 4 a classic. It's the consistent quality of all of its features that make it such an endearing experience. So it only makes sense that carefully bringing them all in line with 18 years worth of technical flourish, while making minimal sweeping changes, was the way they went. Sure, it may feel and look incredibly different, but when you actually sit down and play, you realise that the flow that kept you hooked however many years ago, that never went anywhere. You're playing every bit of Resident Evil 4 that you loved all over again with even more to enjoy. And needless to say, it rocks. This has been Rain Reaver. Feel free to subscribe if you want to see more from me, but more importantly, never stop being yourself and have an amazing day.